Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of chapter 5 of the second book of Samuel. This is Saul Weinreb, host of the podcast. Thank you for joining us again as we continue our study of this chapter. We just read that in the first half of the chapter, where we finished the last verse we read was verse 10, that David had been appointed king of the entire Israel. David had built himself a home and a fortress and a palace and a capital just outside Jerusalem in what became known as the city of David. And we continue with chapter 11. It's not clear that, it seems actually clear that these next verses are not necessarily in chronological order. So, and it kind of jumps back and forth, but the theme of this chapter is the theme of David establishing himself as king. David, beginning with relations with international relations, which is important, obviously, to be a king. The kings in the surrounding areas need to recognize him as such, and or if they're enemies, he has to vanquish them. And that's the kind of thing we're going to read about today. How David began to establish and strengthen his kingdom by building alliances with the friendlies and by getting rid of the enemies. So Vayishlach Hiram melech Tzor, Hiram, the king of Tyre, the king of Tzor, which would be a neighbor to the north. Now they're neighbors. Remember, David is the king over all the northern tribes as well. So his territory would reach up very close to the city of Tyre, which is in modern-day Lebanon. And Hiram, the king of Tzor, sent malachim, messengers, el David, to David. Rather than fight this new arising kingdom, he decided it would be wise to forge an alliance with them. And this alliance held for many generations. We hear about alliances between Tzor and Israel throughout the upcoming generations. We've read about them in some of our previous podcasts and other books. We'll read about them again. It wasn't 100% great. There were times when it was bad, times when it was good, but this was the beginning of this alliance. So they sent messengers, Va'atzei Arazim, and of course coming from Lebanon, which was known at the time for the large cedar trees that would grow there and the really strong and valuable wood, Va'atzei Arazim, they sent them carrying cedar wood, V'choroshe eitz, and people that were skilled in working with wood, carpenters, v'charoshe, evan, kir, and they sent those that are skilled in stonemasons, those that are skilled in building with stone, vayivnu vayis li David, and they built a home, a palace for David. So they demonstrated their friendship, their kinship, their working together with David. Vayeda David, and David knew, apparently David recognized and realized that this is for real. You know, the other nations are recognizing him. He's building his strength. And David knew, Ki hechino Adonai lemelech al Yisrael. It was clearly obvious that God had prepared him for the task to be the king over the Israel. Hechino, I translated prepared, that's probably wrong, because lahachin sometimes means to prepare, but in this context, that God had placed him, had made him. Lahachin here is more with the root of chafnon, which here means to establish, so that God had established him. He knew he's established. And that his kingdom is high, it's lofty. In other words, it's well known. The reputation is spreading. Ba'avor amo Yisrael, and this is crucial that it was being done on behalf of his nation Israel. David understood that it wasn't him, but it was him as a representative of the people of Israel. God put him and established him and made his kingdom well known and well regarded, because God wanted this for his people Israel. David, and this is emphasizing his humility again. And Vayikach David od pilagshim, David took more concubines, v'nashim, and wives miYerushalayim, from Jerusalem. In this context, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were literally from the place of Jerusalem, but from his place in Jerusalem, he took more wives. Achrei bo mechevron, after he came from Hebron. It seems that this is demonstrating his further confidence. He had several wives before when he was in Hebron, but now he's a king. and he brings in more wives. Vayivoldu od leDavid banim ubanos, and they had more children, sons and daughters. Then it lists those children. Vayela shemos hayilodim lo b'Yerushalayim. These are the names of the children he had in Jerusalem. Like I said, this is not necessarily chronologic, but these are the things that happened over his career. But it's laying it out now because it's giving us the impression and showing us that by establishing himself here in Jerusalem with his capital here, and these things happened, his relations with others, his building his family, his building the succession, and so on, are part of him strengthening the monarchy over Israel. Shamua, these are the names: Shamua, v'Shovav, v'Nasan, v'Ushlamo, v'Yivchar, v'Elishua, v'Nefeg, v'Yafia, v'Elishama, v'Elyoda, v'Elifolet. These are names of his children. Vayishmeu Philistine. And now, so that's what happened with his allies and his family, but he also has enemies. And we shouldn't be surprised to know that chief among those enemies are the Philistines. The Philistines have been the implacable foes of the people of Israel until now. And taking and getting rid of them as a force is very important for David to establish his kingdom. Otherwise, it's just going to end up constantly fighting the Philistines. They were the ones that conquered Saul's army and brought about the death of Saul. And the Philistines must have been particularly disappointed because David had pretended to be their friend and sought refuge there, and now he's flipped to become the king of their enemies. This must have made them particularly incensed. Kimashru et David, they heard that David was anointed king lemelech Yisrael over Israel. Vayalu chol Philistine levakesh et David, and all the Philistines, in other words, they all mobilized to search him out, presumably to destroy him. Vayishma David, David heard that they were coming. Vayered el hametzuda, and he went down to the fortress. Right, he went into safety in order to decide what to do next. Uphilishtim ba'u v'yinachu be'emek Rephaim. The Philistines came and they spread out in Emek Rephaim. So we're approaching Jerusalem now, and they come, and now he is in his fortress. Vayishal David b'Adonai lemar. David asks God as follows: Ha'e'ele el Philistim. David, in his modesty, discusses this. Presumably when it says he asked God, it means he discussed it with the religious leadership. Presumably that would be Eviatar, who was the high priest, and asks, and of the Urim V'Tumim, which was worn by the high priest, shall I go fight the Philistines? Or how do I approach this? This kind of gives us the hint that he had another option, right? Those other options could have been to stay in the fortress and just try to wait out the siege. But the other option, I personally believe, is, shall I try to go and negotiate something with them? In other words, are they so strong that I should negotiate with them? Just like he tried to negotiate with the Jebusites. If you listen to the last podcast earlier, this chapter, before he went and fought. Hatitneim biyadi. And David asked them, will you put them in my hand? In other words, do I have the strength? Are you with me? Do I have the strength to take them down? Because if I don't, I need another plan that does not include fighting them right now. And the advice that David received from his religious council, from God, was, I will place the Philistines in your hand. In other words, have the confidence to go out there and fight them. So David went to Baal Pratzim, Vayakem Sham David, and that's where he attacked them from that point, and he struck them. Vayomer, and he said, Paratz Adonai et oivai lefonai keferetz mayim. God broke through my enemies like water breaks through. So if sometimes water could break through like a dam. So I broke through my enemies like that. When we said that David came to Baal Pratzim, it was using that name because these words are being written later. By the time the area is already known as Baal Pratzim, the place of the breakthrough. Because of that event, that's why this name was called Baal Pratzim, the place of Baal Pratzim, which means where the breakthrough took place. Vayazvu shamet tzatzabehem, and the Philistines, when they ran and fled from David, so they're not destroyed yet, but they're on the run. They left their their atzabehem, their idols. Vahisoim David va'anashav, and David and his men carried them off the field. Presumably, what they did was they destroyed them, melted them down, and this begins David accumulating the gold and have precious metals for one day to use in the temple. Vayosifu od Philistine la'alos, and the Philistines continued to march again. In other words, they weren't destroyed yet. Vayinachu be'emek Rephaim. Again, they spread out in the valley of Rephaim. Vayishal David b'Adonai vayomer lo ta'aleh. This time, David asked advice, and God said, "Don't go directly against them to battle. You need a better plan. Hasev el achareim. You need to attack them from behind." Don't attack them the same way you did last time. They're ready and waiting for that attack. But rather, this time, you sneak from behind, opposite bichaim. Exactly what that means is presumably bichaim is a kind of tree. And therefore, where these bichaim trees were. So, vayhi kishamacha et kol tza'ada. And when you hear the sound of the shaking, of the rattling of the trees, b'rashei habichaim, in the tops of the trees, oz techaratz. It is at that point that you should attack. So now, presumably, this when that sound will cover up your attack. So you'll surprise the Philistines because they hear the trees shaking, and they won't hear the troops attacking until it's too late. So because the sound of the trees, this is the simple way of understanding this. There's other ways of understanding this, but that's the way I chose to translate it here. Because it's at that time when God will go before you, to strike down the camp of the Philistines. Vayas David came, David did this, kasher tzivo Adonai, and as God commanded him. And this time it says, not that the Philistines ran, but vayachet Philistine, he struck them down, migeva ad boach haGazer, all the way from Geva to Gezer. And in this way, David subdued his primary enemy, the Philistines, which was necessary for him to establish his kingdom. So now David has started building alliances. He has started gathering wealth. He has started building a family, a royal family, and he has struck down his primary enemy that could potentially have ruined his ability to lead the kingdom. And this concludes chapter 5. We will look forward to starting chapter 6 together. Thank you for studying this together with me, and looking forward to studying the rest of this beautiful book.